Mary Beth, welcome to the platform. How you doing?
I'm great. Glad to be here, Jerome.
Now, I'm glad that you're here as well. I'm excited about this conversation, insider conversation. all the last three mayors, you know.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Before we get into that, I want to go into just your background and
Mhm.
just policy, press journalism, and kind of what inspired you to take that track, that career, and where did that like inspiration come from? Did you always see yourself like being in government and working on policy and things?
Yeah, not really. I mean, I was tangentially involved in the College Democrats when I was an undergraduate, but I studied journalism. I knew I could write, and I loved literature, so I majored in English, but I didn't think English was a very practical credential for getting a good job. So that's why I studied journalism, and I thought I wanted to be a TV reporter, a broadcast reporter.
Okay.
Um, but when I was graduating and looking for jobs, it became clear that to work your way up in TV news, you kind of got to move around the country and start in smaller markets and work your way up.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really have the confidence as a 21-year-old to like move to a city where I didn't have any friends or family and,
Right.
just kind of be out there building a life on my own. So a friend of mine's mom from school was state budget director for the governor of Indiana at the time, and they had an opening for an administrative assistant in the press office for the governor of Indiana. And so I took that, and it was
Okay.
just me and the two press secretaries running that office. And so, I was in that office on September 11th, 2001.
Oh wow.
And the state of Indiana at that time was going through a whole lot. They had a big controversy over pollution in the White River.
Mm-hmm.
They were undergoing a major tax restructuring that was going to impact seniors all across the state. And I really got to not only work with the State House Press Corps and understand the importance of public relations and that interaction between government and the media for getting the word out about what's going on in the government, but also understanding the role of all three branches of government:
Right.
executive, legislative, and judicial. And just how important all that interaction was
Right.
for really having a direct impact on people's lives. So I pretty much, from that position, went into government public affairs for the majority of my career. I've been working, as I said, since 2001. I worked for the Human Services Agency for the state of Indiana, so had everything from mental health and addiction to child
Right.
abuse and neglect and child support, welfare to work programs, Medicaid and Medicaid programs, um, and services for the developmentally disabled and,
Mm-hmm.
people with mental illness. From there, I went to work in the private sector, but on uh, for a contract with the state on tobacco prevention and cessation. So that was a major public health campaign. And then when I moved back to Nashville from Indianapolis in 2005, I was in the private sector for a little bit. At an agency. Blue Cross and Blue Shield was our major client, but from there I went to work in the Bredesen administration, at the Books from Birth Foundation, working on Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, which is an early childhood literacy program that a lot of people should be familiar with. If you've
Right.
got a child under 5, maybe you've got a child in the program.
Do you know Brady Banks?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Brady and
Okay.
I actually worked together a little bit on the program during
Okay.
that time. Yeah, got to meet Dolly 3 times while I was in that job. That was really great. And then during Bredesen's second term, I started to really think about where I wanted to take my career in communications. By that point, I kind of knew that government nonprofit was where, I wanted to earn my living. The
Right.
private sector, just wasn't getting my juices flowing like
Right.
more cause-oriented
Mm-hmm.
PR and comms was. So I started getting involved with the Nashville Civic Design Center, which at that time had started a fledgling nonprofit called Transit Now Nashville.
Right.
And through Transit Now, I met a man named Michael Skipper, who runs currently the Greater Nashville Regional Council. At that time, it was the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the region. And they do all the transportation, policy, planning, and funding for the 10 counties in Middle Tennessee. And he did a presentation on just the growth scenarios looking out to the year 2035 and what Nashville was going to experience in terms of projected traffic congestion,
Right.
consumption of our remaining open space through development. And it was kind of a nightmarish scenario as far as I was concerned as a native Nashvilleian, where growth could take a really ugly turn if we didn't do something to marshal that growth and focus it in a way that preserved sustainability and livability. So I met with him and essentially pitched working for him, and I was there for 5 years as the first and only full-time communicator for an MPO in the state of Tennessee. And I think because I'd gotten that experience, that was the plan that we worked on doing public involvement for, essentially put forward the first vision for how to connect the region via mass transit, which led to InMotion, which led to the push to fund InMotion through referendum in 2018. I think that experience is what interested Mayor Berry in picking me up as a political appointee when she won the mayor's office in 2015.
Right.
And so, she and I had a relationship, going back a ways, and
Right.
I came into her administration to serve as an advisor, knowing that all of this was sort of leading toward how are we going to get the money to
Right.
fund public transportation in a meaningful way for
So-
Middle Tennessee.
Hell of a career, hell of a journey. Hell of a journey. So I have to ask you, during that time, was there ever a moment where you was like, I might have wanted to just do something else, or like this is exactly, I know I'm doing exactly what I want to do. Maybe you experienced both of those moments during that time, but I just know you never know until you know, right? What you really want to do, or this is like kind of for me. So, and especially as a woman, right? In a male dominated kind of sector or profession. And so I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about that as well, of like, those ups and downs, those challenges, those places like it's like, I don't know how long I can keep doing this, or is this something that is really for me?
Right, yeah. Well, twice in recent years, I've taken what I would call a professional sabbatical from pushing forward on what needs to happen in transportation in Middle Tennessee. After the AMP failed around, I guess it was 2014, I went and worked at the Elephant Sanctuary in Hohenwald, Tennessee as their communications director, just working on trying to rescue captive elephants from
Right.
circus and zoo environments and retire them in sanctuary, but also doing education around elephant conservation.
Right.
I got totally out of Nashville, and then recently I've been working in Chattanooga. I went and worked for the current mayor down there, as well as the Chamber of Commerce down there, just because I wanted a change of pace from transportation, as well as Nashville and sort of what's going on with the political environment and the growth. And I'm a native Nashvilleian, so I think if you're interested in cities and how cities work and what makes successful cities, living in a different city is a good exercise if you have the flexibility, to do so. And so I went down to Chattanooga and lived there for a year and learned a lot about what's making it hum.
Right.
There's some good ideas that we could import back here, even though they're only half of our size.
Right.
They're definitely a peer of ours and are doing a lot of the same things around economic development that Nashville was doing in previous iterations of our Partnership 2000, Partnership 2020 sort of regional strategic plan that the Chamber and its partners sort of operate off of. When there are setbacks like that, like the referendum, going down and the AMP, not getting built,
Right.
long-time transportation and transit advocates, if you want to maintain the energy and the idealism to keep at it, knowing
Right.
that this is a long game, a sabbatical I think is good to recharge and to
Reset.
rejuvenate. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just take a break from the subject matter.
Exactly. So now I kind of just want to get straight into it, because I think we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
Working in the mayor's office, 3 different mayors. So quickly, I want to go through each mayor, but I want you to take us through kind of the differences of being in the environment of Megan Barry, Bradley, and then Cooper, and kind of maybe what are some pros and cons of each administration that you experienced personally being in the mayor's office doing those three different kind of thing as well, like Nashville kind of transitions here.
Yeah. Well, Megan and I had a personal relationship. So I was her appointee on transportation and sustainability, along with a colleague of mine, Erin Hafkinshiel, who moved here from the state of California. So that comfort and familiarity, I think, led to, the ability to be frank with her during meetings, and, it's relaxed. There's not a lot of tension. But also because you have that personal relationship, there's that drive to really want to deliver your best every single day and not disappoint this person, because
Right.
you have such a rapport and admiration and esteem for them. She also, one of the reasons I had a relationship with her was because Megan was always very involved and supportive of the Young Democrats. You would go to something at her house, there was always young people around.
Right.
So the office, was stacked with people who were early to mid-career, and, it was just a really good working environment in terms of the talent that she was able to bring on board. I think there was a lot of interest in, her star might have been rising politically,
Right.
being the first female mayor elected of metropolitan government. There was just a lot of people who were interested in working just for her, to come to
Right.
Nashville just for that opportunity,
Right.
to be in that administration. So I would say that, all of the staff, loved and respected each other. Open door in terms of the communication. I could go to my colleagues working on affordable housing
Right.
and, sit in their office and find ways to partner and collaborate and catch up with them about what's going on, and vice versa.
Right.
That was happening all the time. It was a good office for that. Um, you know, there was definitely, I think, some barriers that she was open to working on as her first term and potentially a second term would have happened, in terms of policy aides like myself and others in the office really needed more insight and access to what was going on with putting together the metro budget. That's a big part of what that job is, in terms of just both the executive branch, but also policy aides aren't able to deliver on what's on their portfolio, or what the agenda to move the needle forward might be without resources.
Right.
And so when those conversations and decisions are sort of happening amongst a small clique of people, close to the filing deadline or whatever, it happens where you're just not able to get in there
Right.
and advocate. It's always a matter of advocacy. Particularly my portfolio was transportation and sustainability, and I would wager to guess that that's probably still the case now, where the political heavyweights, in terms of when it comes time for the metro budget to get assembled and passed at council, are always going to be police, fire, and schools. And
Right.
they take such a huge portion of the available tax revenues that finance and the administration have to work with, that for folks who are working on departments that have an impact on livability and sustainability, we're talking departments like planning, codes, public works, MTA, and parks. You really need to be able to get in there and advocate for, what the priorities might be this year, and
Right.
what, and just making sure there's a level of coordination and teamwork around that. I think, was something that needed to be worked on. But I also think that, Mayor Berry had the introspection to look inward and know, like, hey, like, we could do a better job of this. So that all was happening in terms of looking at the office structure and, coming up with those levers for policy aides like myself to really get in there and, figure out how to access the resources or
Right.
just be at the table when those big decisions are being made about, how to just spend extremely limited resources.
Right.
Given that we are, relatively speaking, I'm sure a lot of people might think otherwise, a low tax environment.
Yeah.
You get what you pay for,
Right.
And that's the southeastern United States in general, not just Nashville, Tennessee. The Briley administration, I would say, was...
Before you get to Briley.
Yeah, sure.
Before you
yeah.
get to Briley.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think it's a pivotal moment.
yeah.
That transition from Mayor Berry to Briley, how did that affect maybe your role in the office in 2018, where so much personally is happening for Mayor Berry, which was her son, and then the affair, the security affair, and then the misuse of public fund, all of these things, this
Right.
as being, in that office, did you see any of this happening, or coming, and just how was that transition as a staff and figuring out, okay, like this is kind of crazy, this is kind of
Right.
weird.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, the information about, what was going on was really, staff was finding out about it as the media
General
was
public,
releasing it, and the general public was finding out about it. And so, I would be in a meeting on the transit referendum because if you'll recall, things were really a lot of activity around getting that referendum over the finish line during the period that the scandal broke. So I would be in meetings around what do we need to do next today to get our message out on the benefits of this funding program.
Right.
And there would be another headline, kind of coming in. And so it was, it was deeply demoralizing for staff. But, I think fortunate for Nashville that she did do a good job putting dedicated public servants in place. I'm not just talking about myself, I'm talking about all my colleagues. Everybody in that office was there because they were trying to make a difference. And so, we're just going to charge forward and do the best we can, with what we got. The legislation had been filed. It's going to be on the ballot in May. There's no turning back now. I mean, I guess we could have, filed legislation to put it on November instead.
Right.
I think maybe even Councilmember Mendez had floated that at a meeting at one point. And hindsight, maybe we should have done that. But I think that all along there might have been, some sort of hope that there could be a legal maneuver to sort of, put this to bed, essentially, given it was a personal issue on her part for the most part. So, it was...
having that personal relationship
yeah.
with her, and maybe like some other staff members had, did that relationship change at any point during when the scandal things were happening, or did that relationship that y'all had before that kind of help it, I guess, make it a easier thing to handle because you could talk to her, you could kind of flush things out in a deeper way if it was just kind of just a professional relationship?
Yeah, I would definitely say that my relationship with her caused me to have enormous empathy for everything that was going on in her life, from what happened with her son to the impact to her career from something of that nature. And she called every one of us into her office, when it first broke, and had a one-on-one with us where, she personally apologized and, tried to reassure us that we're going to get through it and come through it okay. So as the days went on, we were all just hopeful that it was going to, sort of run its course, run through the news cycle, and then we could get back to work.
If if Mayor Megan Barry was a man, does this happen? Does this flesh out differently? Does she even resign? Does she?
I think so. I mean, I
Okay.
think women political leaders have to be above reproach.
Okay.
And that may change in the years and decades to come, but we definitely have people who have had something like that. Gavin Newsom in California comes to mind. President Trump on multiple levels,
Right.
even far worse,
Yeah.
and repercussions of, of this nature, of the
Right.
severity of having to negotiate a resignation, I think, as part of the plea deal, I think was a pretty heavy hammer, in my opinion, for our city
Right.
and for her career.
Right.
There could have been other punitive actions taken besides inserting a resignation in there as
Right.
part of the plea deal.
Now, with all that's going on, you have to transition. With Riley, what is the environment now? What is the energy like in the office now?
Well, I'd also known David for a long time as
Okay.
well. And,
Who is now Judge?
Judge Briley.
Judge
Yeah.
Riley.
Yeah, his honor. Yeah,
Is he General Sessions?
I believe so.
Okay,
Yeah.
I can't remember what court, which division, but
Yeah,
congratulations
yeah,
to him,
right.
'cause I know he just won this past election.
Right, yeah. So, he and I also had a relationship. I think he and his political team were sort of committed to, for the most part, status quo for the year and a half left on Megan's term in terms of the staffing. And I think there were some projects on the table that, ended up being sort of politically tenuous for him that had been started under Mayor Barry, like the Church Street Park
Right.
deal and the parking sort of project in terms of partnering with an outsourced private sector partner on running our parking enforcement. There were some things like that continued as projects that maybe should have been tabled, but for the most part, there were also some really good things in the pipeline that Mayor Bradley, to his credit, didn't put the kibosh on and supported and did everything he could to get over the finish line as he finished out the term. He had a decisive leadership style. I found him to be pretty decisive and approachable.
Okay.
But I would say for the most part, it was just kind of towing the line, holding status quo while we work on. He had actually 2 elections during that year and a half period of time. There was a special election to make sure he could, remain
Right.
in there. And then, at the end of the term, it was time for reelect.
Right.
Yeah.
That was a year and a half.
Yeah. So for example, in my portfolio, I had in the hopper the launch of a countywide tree planting campaign called Root Nashville.
Right.
That we had almost everything in place to launch and announce that, and we were able to do that.
Right.
So
doing all this transition, and then you have 2 elections as a staff in the mayor's office. How challenging, I guess, is it to focus on your portfolio and still trying to get things and policies passed and people educated, community educated, doing all these headlines that people tend to navigate to first, or they let the headlines influence, right? What should or shouldn't be happening.
Right. Well, I think when you're an appointee or you're in a job where it's an appointed position, you're under the microscope the whole time.
Right.
And so even though it's not your name that's on the ballot, it's the elected official, you're still in a leadership position. And so leaders are pretty much always on stage. And so even if, what you're encountering in terms of, maybe the community's not fully bought into the current mayor.
Right.
Like maybe they think that this is a placeholder administration and it's not going to matter after 2019 or whatever. You can't act like that when you're in that role because, every day is an opportunity to get something done. Like,
Right.
The emails that would fly across my desk, even if it was just a constituent wanting to express concern or have their voice heard about something on my portfolio and, it's being routed to me for a response. There was a lot of that, but then there's also just the mayor's office is an entity that can help other people out in the community to do good things, and they need help. And so everything that was coming across my desk was meaningful and could, if to the extent that I invested the time and energy into it, I mean, you have limited bandwidth in that job. That's part of the problem. There was an opportunity for it to make a difference.
Right.
Even if it didn't last beyond the term or any of your or my lifetime, it still could make a difference today.
Right.
So you just kind of have to fake it till you make it, honestly. And even if you're exhausted or dismayed or worried, I would say for my part as an appointee, the resignation caused me to have anxiety about my livelihood. When something abrupt like that and unexpected and controversial like that happens, I was sort of like really worried about whether or not I was bringing value both to the leadership that inherited the role, but also to the taxpayer.
Right.
And so any opportunity I could find, and I also wanted David to be successful. Like I said, he and I went back a long way, and for the time that he was in there, I wanted him to have some wins.
Right.
He was thrust into a pretty stressful situation, and he was excited about it, but I'm sure it also it wore on him as well.
Right. So on to our third mayor.
Yeah.
And so this is what I'm curious about, Mary Beth. You were able to sustain and be, kind of, I guess, reappointed or maintain this position through all three mayors. Is that common? Or does that just really say a lot about like just your expertise in the work and the relationships you've built for multiple mayors to say, hey, like Mary Beth is the right person for this role, for what we want to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I had accumulated between the Metropolitan Planning Organization and the, first full term of the Berry/Briley administration, pretty much a decade of experience in transportation. And so transportation can be kind of a niche issue where it really does take a little bit of subject matter knowledge to be able to talk about these concepts with a general public audience. And my background being communications, I think I'm pretty well suited to be in an appointed environment because the mayor's office isn't, let's be clear, actually doing much of anything. It's really a sophisticated convener and leadership entity, right? Like you're making an impact leadership-wise when you put forward your budget when you're in that role, but that's only once or twice a year when you do your capital and operating budgets. The rest of the time, the office is sort of functioning, for the most part, in a public relations role, which is, when you have a public relations background, you understand that your communications have to be clear and compelling, timely, and then you have to know who all to have at the table and when, and have those relationships to bring those people to the table. And so a public relations practitioner, I think, is well suited for that. And then you combine that with the fact that I'd been in transportation 10 years
Right.
and along for the ride since 2009 when we put forward the first regional transit vision, all the way up through trying to fund that vision with
Right.
Let's Move Nashville in 2018. You know,
Makes sense.
yeah, you know, it would, if he was going to do something on transportation, I served a useful purpose in
Right.
surviving the transition. I
Right.
was one, I think, of around 7 mayor's office employees out of around 35, I think,
To go through it.
to
Okay.
survive the transition, which is
Okay.
a small number.
Right.
I think that's something that the voters should know in terms of, you know, just the value that gets placed on institutional knowledge when administrations change over. And I think when Megan resigned and we had a very low turnout election, you know, for the runoff that year, that was a pretty impactful decision in terms of the institutional knowledge that
Right.
went out the door during that transition. So, you know, sustainability also, I think, is somewhat of a niche issue. I didn't have that in my background prior to becoming an appointee, where my colleague, as I mentioned, who moved here from California, had that in her background. And so I think because we were going to be a team, they just collapsed that onto my portfolio. So at that point, I'd had 4 years, excuse me, in sustainability. And I had people that I was interacting with outside the office on that portfolio who I think were advocating that I would get to stay because they were not keen on having to develop an entire new working relationship
Right.
with another appointee.
So how was your experience with Mayor Cooper? Because you're no longer in, you know, he's still in office. You're no longer there. How was that work environment experience? Because he has recently had, you know, many people, you know, in I think key leadership positions resign. You know, some of which I've had here, sitting right where you sitting.
Right.
And so, so I'm curious on, you know, that experience and, you know, and why you're no longer there.
Well, so I was the last Barry appointee with any policy responsibility as of, you know, mid 2021 in that administration. I think pretty much everyone had been resigned or had resigned, you know, or been cut loose during transition or for other reasons. And so I think when everyone went to work from home during the pandemic, that was in my opinion, a big impact on the cohesion and camaraderie of the office. You know, of course, there was technology there to facilitate touch points and communication, but
Right.
the mayor's office is a very high touch environment where I think it's useful to be in the office having those hallway conversations and
Right.
showing your face and building that. You're building political capital with
Right.
your colleagues, just like you're building political capital with constituents and residents on the outside, you know, neighbors. And so I think I was sort of, because I was a holdover from the Barry administration, and it was hard for me from the get-go to develop those relationships, you know, not having been a Cooper appointee, when the pandemic hit, it was a lot of out of sight, out of mind,
Right.
unfortunately. And I think, you know, I think they wanted someone in the sustainability role who had a better rapport with the current mayor. It's all
Right.
about who he or she is comfortable with.
Right.
And I don't know that Mayor Cooper was going to be comfortable interacting in a very honest, recurring, straightforward way with Barry appointees, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I reached the end of my useful life about 2 years in, and it was time for me to move on because I was being underutilized, in my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you go through these three, you know, mayors here in Nashville, just historically, I don't know if we ever have done that, like ever here, like three mayors in I guess what 4 years, or like 4.5 years. We had three different mayors. And now a pandemic happens, and we're just now, I guess, coming out of that. As far as the city, people are still, you know, catching COVID, and people are still working remotely. But now we're in a very interesting spot, I think, here in Nashville, especially around transportation. But also, we have an election coming up in 2023. We could possibly have a new mayor. And I think you're the perfect person to really have this conversation with on what the future of Nashville may look like or should look like, depending on maybe the decisions that the mayor we may have going forward for the next 4 years make or don't make. And so, what questions should we as community members and neighbors be having on our mind to ask our next potential mayor, or and maybe not even ask, like demand, right? What should we be demanding from the next mayor going into 2023 when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to transportation and just preservation, right? Of, you know, we're both Nashville natives. We don't want to see the soul of Nashville leaves for big business, you know. So I just want to dive into that deep and use up all of your policy gems and experience in working with mayors and understanding how the city navigates and works in what, you know, candidates are even thinking and what a team's planning and things right now.
Yeah, well, so I have heard that the polling would indicate that the top major areas of concern for Nashvillians going into this upcoming mayoral election are the pressures of growth on affordability and livability. Just, there are a lot of people, when you're talking about the metro electorate, which, you know, as I understand, has not changed much.
Right.
From when Mayor Barry was running in 2015. As I mentioned, super low turnout on the runoff election that decided between Mayor Briley and Mayor Cooper in 2019. So we're still talking about pretty much a skewing older electorate. I wish more young people would, you know, get registered and vote in metro elections and understand how directly, you know, impactful local government decisions are, and not just vote in presidentials all the time. But that's a whole other conversation about voter engagement and just where people are in terms of their civic duty and the democracy these days. But, you know, if those are the top areas of concern, is like, we're getting out ahead of our skis on growth in terms of you can't even get into home ownership. The rents are too high. Okay. There's that affordability aspect. There's also the affordability aspect on transportation, and that during the pandemic, you probably heard about this microchip issue with the manufacturing of new cars, to where now the average new car is around $45,000, which now has impacted the used car market. So transportation and your housing note are pretty much neck and neck on the top two household expenditures in terms of, like, people are trying to make ends meet. And as we all know, the wages aren't being raised accordingly for people to be able to afford either of those two things that they need to get by. And then just, you know, we've got an issue around over-tourism. I think visitors to our downtown from other cities who are, like, coming here to do a peer review and bring us lessons from their cities and observe what's going on in our city are starting to look at the over-tourism situation and be like, y'all really need to watch that. Because, you know, having a downtown that's not livable for residents because it's become a Las Vegas Strip type situation will have impact on the growth countywide. You need that growth downtown. You need people living and working downtown that are Nashvillians, not just tourists.
Is that East Bank vision, is that part of that expanding growth? Excuse me, is that part of that expanding growth that you're talking about that I guess the mayor is trying to get in front of?
Yeah, because there's a lot of land in that area that's under Metro's control. So
Right.
there's very few areas left in the county where you have land that, you can put a vision forward,
Right.
because, Metro is like a major stakeholder in that whole situation
Right.
along with the NFL team, right? So if you're for quality growth,
Uh-huh.
and us not continuing to sprawl out into the suburban ring counties, or even our beautiful remaining farm and forest and pasture land that we have in Davidson County, you're for focusing some of that growth on the East Bank.
Right.
It's not just developers and the Titans and
Right.
Councilman Withers and whomever else constituencies are for that. Like, if you're for quality growth, you want that to happen. And our downtown is kind of constrained.
Right.
And so that's a good area to make, accommodate some of that growth. I do think that the generational setback of voting down transit in 2018 is causing the East Bank to sort of pop up in terms of focus, because to get more growth in along our major transit corridors, like where we were going to put light rail on Gallatin and Charlotte and Nolensville and Murfreesboro and BRT on Hillsborough and Clarksville Pike, the number one barrier to getting density in along those corridors is neighbors' concerns around traffic congestion.
Right.
And it's a legitimate concern, because if you do build a high-rise mixed-use development, it's going to bring more cars unless you have the transit service. So when you go to your neighbors and you say, we want to build a high-rise mixed-use development here on Nolensville Pike, they're going to come out and they're going to say, this is going to bring a whole bunch of cars. And they're
Right.
going to be right, because we haven't funded WeGo in a way that will enable us to get the BRT or the rail line in,
Right.
to where we can say to those neighbors, oh, but transit is coming. Don't worry. Not everybody who lives in this building is going to even own a car.
Right.
They're going to be able to get around without one, because
Right.
we are a city that will accommodate that,
Right.
right? So that's also, I think, part of the problem, is that the growth is coming. We've sort of let the genie out of the bottle in terms of economic development and jobs, right? Like, we spent 10, 20, 30 years luring these employers, giving them, $500 per head incentive deals or
Right.
whatever it was.
Tax breaks.
Yeah, economic development. We
Right.
did economic development. We embraced it. We said, we want all the jobs. And bringing jobs is good. Like, look at all the new restaurants we've got. Look
Right.
at
Hotels.
the diversity.
Yep.
Yeah, and beautiful hotels that were
Right.
historic, that were probably going to be condemned
Right.
if some capital didn't come in here to renovate them and put and preserve that for a
Right.
city. There's a lot of good that's come with economic development and the growth, but then there does come a point where, what I heard the CEO of the chamber say recently is that I think Partnership 2040, whatever they're on now, is now instead of just economic development being the top focus area, it's now livability. It's preservation of livability. But and it part of me wonders, well, like, why couldn't we walk and chew gum at the same time and like
Right.
focus on that stuff while we
While
were
we
doing
were-
the economic development deals? And I think that's been a big criticism of people in that field of economic development, is like they do things sort of in a silo, because some of these deals happen kind of secretly.
Right.
So they're not coordinating with the planning department and transportation experts on like how to do this in a way that doesn't cause a whole bunch of traffic congestion and a bunch of trees to get chopped down.
Right.
But okay, so now that we've let this genie out of the bottle and we're an attractive place to do business, and all these companies are coming here, and it's now like building one deal on top of each other, it's sort of continuing to happen. If we don't really put measures in place to guide the growth in a way that preserves livability and sustainability, and I believe that key to that
Right.
is getting transit in on major corridors,
Right.
then we will, as the old saying goes, end up a lot like Atlanta, where you have, you're driving through Atlanta and your GPS says, stay in the left 5 lanes. And
That's
during
crazy.
peak period, all 5 lanes are full,
Right.
and it's the impact of that on quality of life and air
Yeah.
pollution and equity.
How so, okay, as how do we overcome that? Like,
Hmm.
what decisions need to be made, and and kind of what kind of power do Nashvillians have in making that happen?
Hmm.
Um, in getting those measures in there, because I think everybody's talking about it, right? Hey, we need this traffic is crazy. I know we was talking about it, when you came in, like, if depending which way you're going, if you're not on the road by 2 o'clock
Hmm.
or 3 o'clock, is you gonna be, you might as well just stay where you are. And Nashville didn't used to be like that. Like, you
Right.
can go from one side 10, 15 minutes, you there. And it's getting ridiculous. And I think so everybody is, and I'm pretty sure people are probably in their car now listening to this in traffic, probably,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so, what needs to happen? Because I think people are like don't know that answer. I think,
Hmm.
and then who has the power to make it happen? Is it council? Is it the mayor? Is it and both? Is it metro planning? Is it collaboration? Um, where does the money need to come from? Talking about a dedicated fund for transit,
Hmm.
like because I think, again, going into the next mayoral election, which is 2023, we also have some council members up for re-election and seats opening there too. Like, how does all that synergy kind of like how is that synergy connected in what happens or what doesn't happen?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think there is some assumptions being made in our community about that are really armchair, like, this is what I think, assumption,
Mm-hmm.
about why the referendum failed in
Right.
2018. And you know how the saying goes, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me.
Right.
Okay. There, there has been some sort of take at an exit poll on that campaign and that referendum that the chamber did, and it showed that the resignation of Mayor Berry occurring right smack in the middle of that push played an outsized role in the
Mm.
referendum's failure. And that makes sense because a lot of the ask to the voter to push the button for it was hinged upon her campaigning for it, her 92% approval rating, her plan. And so when, she resigned in the
Mm.
middle of it, I think confidence in the metropolitan government's ability to deliver on that program went out the window with it.
Right.
And so we really need to sort of view 2018 as a first effort out the gate, and the resignation occurring in the middle of that as an anomaly and an unfortunate disservice to the community in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how many years we've lost,
Right.
in terms of what WeGo needs to innovate or even
Right.
to provide better bus service today,
Right.
as well as to get started on a future vision for something that will guide the growth in the way that I've been talking about, such as what we call fixed guideway transit. And
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't matter if it's bus rapid transit or light rail transit, but it's a lane for WeGo to operate their service without sitting in traffic congestion
Right.
and getting, sidetracked in terms of their performance by people sitting in their cars driving alone, which is what's currently happening. And so transit's not going to be competitive until we're able to build something where WeGo's operating in their own right of way.
I remember seeing like signs of like vote against transit plan and all of these things. Um, Outside of like what was happening with Mayor Megan Berry, was it also maybe community members not wanting other community members in their community?
Yeah, I think in the southeastern United States, we do have a stigma about public transportation that we need to get over and get
Right.
beyond. And the fact that we've embraced economic development overall the past, couple of decades, we have a lot of new people moving here, who are coming here from cities like Boston or San Francisco, where they've had access to heavy rail transit their entire lives, and they get here and they're like, where's the transit?
Right.
That's a benefit, of having those new folks come here. And if we can get them in the mix and encourage them to vote and tax themselves, I think, as I mentioned, I think we favor low tax environments in the Southeast, and perhaps a full penny on the sales tax in 2018 was a bridge too far. You can poll that, by the way. You can, get a poll back out there and ask folks like, do you agree traffic congestion is a problem?
Right.
If so, do you think public transportation is a key part of the solution?
Right.
If so, would you be willing to pay for it? If so, what would you be willing to put on the table in terms of a tax? Once you get down into the what you would you be willing to pay for it and what, that's where it starts to become more evenly split 50-50. And that's where you really have to put forward a campaign to convince, that sort of moderate middle, which is always the case like in a presidential election. The left and the right are kind of baked in on where they are. You're competing for that moderate, undecided in the middle, and persuade them to go your way, and that they're going to reap the benefit of it.
What are other alternatives outside of public transportation? Because, what have you heard anything else be proposed outside of AMP or a light rail or something like that will help with congestion and also just help with livability?
Well, I think there's probably still an overriding misconception that adding more lanes of traffic will help ease the traffic, right?
Okay.
Like, I think if you were to ask the general public what's out there in terms of solutions, they're going to put more lanes on the table as a part of their list, or then they're going to put traffic signal synchronization on their list. I believe the Cooper administration has been working with TDOT on a traffic operations center and some signal resync stuff. You can cut into congestion very modestly with technology, like signal improvements and TOCs, very moderately. Adding a lane, again, I mentioned Atlanta, 6 lanes in either direction because of their development patterns, and they didn't orient their new people and their new development around MARTA when they got that in the 1990s. They just continue to sprawl out in a suburbia. They've got 6 lanes in either direction and they're all full. So, adding lanes isn't a solution. I think good leaders or smart leaders of this community need to lead, and they need to tell the citizens of Nashville that congestion is here. It's going to get worse because we're going to continue to grow as a city. All cities in the Sun Belt part of the United States are on a growth spurt because high tax environments in places like the Northeast and the West Coast and all those places are super heavily populated and congested, so they're all coming here. So our only choice is to give people alternatives to get around congestion. If you've been to New York City, getting on the expressway to Long Island is you're fighting for your life, and it's congested every single day. But you have the Long Island Railroad you can get on if you don't want to get in that.
Exactly.
You have the MTA. You have an alternative. You have a bike lane on a New York City street that you can get in. There's a huge number of trips that we could capture that are short hop, 3 to 7 mile trips, that if we had a bikeway network, all those trips could potentially go in there. So we're never going to get rid of congestion or cause it to go down. It's really about, we have a limited amount of space. The streets have been the same since the 1950s, 60s, 70s. They're not going anywhere. We're not widening Nolensville Pike right into the very businesses and homes that people are trying to access. That's a non-starter. But what we can do is give people alternatives to get around congestion, and that's where we have a major challenge in that we haven't funded those modes appropriately.
If you were at a mayoral panel, right, and the topic is transit. What questions or demands would you be asking those mayoral candidates around transit?
Yeah, well, so the current mayor went to the trouble of having the council pass legislation to endorse, I believe, a $2 billion transportation plan that had some, I think it might have had some BRT corridors proposed as part of it. They didn't include anything rail-wise other than improvements to the WeGo Star. But, I would be asking, where are we on, bringing in the opportunistic funding that was pledged as part of, asking the council to endorse that as the program of priorities for the city. And to the extent that opportunistic funding hasn't been wildly successful, what is the course of action, on a second term for getting dedicated funding to, getting the full $2 billion and build out every single thing on this list that you put forward and ask council to endorse, and the timeline for doing that. So, the 2018 referendum, I also think was somewhat hamstrung by, and there were probably good reasons to do this, but putting on a May Democratic primary with the hopes that it being a Democratic primary, it's going to be mostly Democrats that come out who are going to be more friendly toward a tax increase. And so it'll pass because we've kind of stuck it on this May random primary. Well, that turned out not to be the case. Instead, Republicans came out in droves to vote against it. So if the thinking is, if we want to try to get funding for transit again, which because of the state enabling legislation on the Improve Act, we're sort of constrained in how we can pursue going about getting new taxes for WeGo and for other modes of transportation. We have to do it by referendum. Are we thinking we want to do it on a presidential election?
Right.
If so, those are occurring in 2024 and 2028. So if you're running for mayor, are you making 2024 part of your campaign for that office in 2023?
Right.
Or are you realistically going to spend your first term putting together another plan and going back out to the community and asking them what they'd like to fund and how would they fund it to gear up for 2028? And then what does Nashville look like in 2028?
Right. Looks more congested than it is today.
Yeah, because we're building the city right now.
Right.
There's like 20 cranes in the sky right now.
Right. And you would think it'll make it harder to build any type of transit after the building. It's like, okay, we went through the congestion because the building was happening, so we had to find alternate routes. Now that it's done, we figured, we got our streets back. We can go our shortcuts. Oh, well, no, we can't, because now we have to implement transit that may take, who knows, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years to complete.
Right. Yeah. If we know that, a BRT or a rail corridor is coming on Nolensville Pike and a developer's coming along today knowing that land values are going up astronomically and they want to be opportunistic and make their money putting in a mixed-use high-rise development on Nolensville Pike, is the planning department right now working with them to set that building back appropriately to where WeGo can get in there with their own dedicated lane, or are they just letting it slide? Or is that mixed-use high-rise development even happening? Because transit's, not there to the extent that it needs to be, and it's not necessarily coming in terms of a fixed guideway and the way that can focus development. And so, as a result, are we just getting more subdivisions in our greenfield out in, Greater Bellevue?
I'm hearing you talk about this, and I'm being completely informed about this process, and I'm pretty sure the listeners and the watchers are too. And it makes me ask, where are these conversations happening at now, if they're happening?
I mean, there's a small constituency of people that I think are very interested in this topic, like folks that are connected to the Civic Design Center and The Transit Alliance, actually, I'm in their Citizen Leadership Academy right now, and that's just a lot of community leaders, but also just average Davidson County residents who are interested in this topic and wanting to learn more about it. And if you're, if you're really interested in it, that'd be a good. It's like
Yeah.
just a 6-week training program on bringing you along on all what's happened to date and where we go.
Because we all affected by it, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like it should be, it's a crisis.
Yeah.
Right? We have a congestion traffic crisis. It's like we have a education, unhoused, affordable housing. Like there's many crises, and I feel like they all are up there
Right.
on that high like top tier level. But it seems like the transit conversation, I think it's a little more complex. I think people understand like education. People understand like housing a little better than like, okay, well, transit, like what does that mean and who does that? And
Right.
like how do I get involved with that? And that's
Right.
why I asked like where these conversations happen, because we hear people every day talking about this national traffic. Oh my gosh,
Right.
and it's a transit thing, but it's like, okay, where can we build community around this and figure out, okay, who do we need to apply some type of accountability to,
Yeah.
or some type of political pressure to like, no, we don't need to be waiting until 2028.
Yeah.
we need to be figuring out something like yesterday.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. I think there is a sort of skeleton version of the coalition left from the 2018 referendum of those community groups that were for it,
Right.
that are still meeting and talking about how to regroup. I do think that we're missing some key top line leadership voices from our major institutions and from our elected leadership on not having a defeatist attitude about what happened in 2018, understanding that the resignation played a role in its failure, understanding that maybe, a rail heavy proposal with the tunnel and everything built into it that required a full penny on the sales tax, we could just scale it back from there. And just, even if we were to get over the hump of not being in the only one of only 2 cities in the top 40 U.S. metros where the bus system doesn't have dedicated funding.
All right.
Let's just take WeGo off the metro rolls,
Right.
and get them their own revenue source. Let's maybe start with that and see if the
Right.
voter would go for that on the ballot. I think we just need to get our mojo back on this subject, honestly, and not give up.
Yeah.
And that's what leaders are supposed to do. They're supposed to, when a setback happens, just stay positive and
Right.
and learn from like why it wasn't successful. Specifically, like get really specific, and then try again, and really believe in it. Don't just do it because you think it's what is good for you politically, or
Right.
everybody's kind of in your ear saying like this is what needs to happen. We need champions for public transportation
Right.
that really understand its power to connect people to opportunity, to
Right.
transform cities, and to bring Nashville into the 21st century.
And I want to hit on this, and you brought it up, but the equity piece. Help us understand, how does public transportation create equity in a city like Nashville, where we know like gentrification is coming, that's just ran rapid. We still in the South, still very a diverse but segregatedly diverse city. People are still in their community pockets. And you talk about like bus lanes, bicycle lanes, where those even are, right? May not be dispersed equitably throughout the city as well. How does public transportation in a good public transportation plan create that equity for those communities that are affected by it the most?
Well, I'll just share a personal anecdote. When I grew up in Nashville, and when I was admitted to magnet school in the 7th grade, I went to the magnet school 7th through 12th.
What school was that?
Meg's Magnet and
Oh,
also
Meg.
and
Okay.
UFOG,
Okay.
yeah.
So I went to Head. I didn't go
Okay.
to MLK though. I know, but that's a
Yeah.
tunnel. I
I
went to
went to
Pearl.
Head 5th and 6th,
Okay.
Meg 7th and 8th. But, I lived in Bellevue and a single parent household. My mom worked for a living. There was no way I was getting to the magnet school without riding MTA.
Right.
And so I had that lesson to where when I graduated from college, I had a ton of debt. And in order to try and get ahead on paying down that debt, I needed to not get a car right out of college when I started my working life. And so I specifically located myself in an apartment on an Indigo bus line in Indianapolis to where I could plot out my commute trip from home to work. And then I
Right.
just leaned on friends the rest of the time. And I did that for a couple of years so that I could get out of debt. And so that's an example of, when the barrier to getting into car ownership is
Right.
multiple thousands of dollars and you simply don't have it. Like the cost of
Right.
owning, operating, and maintaining a vehicle is around $9,000 per year. If you were to just take that expenditure off limited income households right off the bat by having a good transit system, you've got more money for medicine, you've got more money for housing. Like your housing cost, all of a sudden it's, even if it's high, it's more attainable, if you don't have to have that car. And then the other piece of it for me is 1/3 of the population does not drive. Too young, so they don't have a license.
Right.
Too old,
Right.
too poor, or disabled. What does our community look like if the barrier of transportation is taken away for all those
Right.
populations, to where our seniors are able to volunteer at our nonprofits,
Right.
our youth who might be getting in trouble are able to get, a job at Baskin Robbins.
Right.
Our disabled population is able to get better health care
Right.
or, go to the Frist Museum when they
Right.
want. I mean,
Right.
if you're for equity, you're for transit because
Right.
all of those people need to use the system. And in
Right.
cities where there's a good transit system, they are.
Wow. No, that's amazing. And I thought about it. You took me back living abroad, right? You talking about leaving your homegrown city or state and looking at what other cities do. In my case, looking at what other countries have done. And I was fortunate to live in China for 2 years.
Right.
You talking about public transportation,
Right.
like through the whole country efficiently. Like you do not have to have a car, and not like living in all of these different countries I had the opportunity to. I never needed a car
Right.
because like being in the Philippines or Italy or Costa Rica or China or Paraguay, like never having to think about a car because it was sufficient, well calculated and put together public transportation, and majority of people used it, right? And then it alleviates their cost. And when I come back to the United States, it's like I have to get a car if I want to get to this job, and then it's like, okay, I got to get the car. Then I got to get car insurance, right? Because anything can happen. And then of course, like, gotta have car maintenance. A tire will be flat, or oil change will be, something is gonna happen, right? And so, like, those are all funds that at any moment I could have to spend $500 for a repair, or even just a deductible at any moment that I might not even have.
Right.
And so, like,
I do want to just offer that while we were pushing for the referendum in 2018, the conservatives who are going to be against something like that, a lot of which are Koch brothers funded, are going to come out of the woodwork anyway and launch a campaign against it. And they're going to throw out a lot of misinformation and conservative talking points, because really when it comes down to it, they're just anti-tax. Like, they don't necessarily care that it's for public transit. They just
they don't want to pay for it.
in principle they don't want more taxes to pass. And so in Nashville's case, I think there's a lot of work to be done before we go back out to lock up the left. And that includes our equity advocates and our affordable housing advocates. And I think there's still more education to be done around exactly what we were just talking about, that the high household cost of transportation is really neck and neck with the high cost of rent and mortgage with our housing affordability crisis, and that we have the legislative authority under the Improve Act, where Republican supermajority at the state gave Nashville permission to go on the ballot to get additional funds for WeGo and for walking and biking, which are also free to low cost transportation,
Right.
building those facilities, sidewalks and bike lanes, where we don't have that for affordable housing yet. We can do the Barnes Fund
Right.
through the Metro General Fund and things like that, but we do not have legislative authority from the state to pass $5.4 billion in capital funds for affordable housing subsidy at this
Right.
time. And so, just it's not a competition.
Right.
If we get rid of one huge household expenditure for people of limited income, limited and low income, that's a huge success for our community, and we need to all get on board the next
Right.
time we have this opportunity. And in some of our African American precincts, it got voted down 80 to 90%. And that to me is heartbreaking, because those communities, I think, stood the most to gain from access to quality and affordable
Why do you believe
transportation.
why do you believe that happened? Or what was the feedback after it happened that you realized that the majority of the African American community did not want the
So I think
rail,
there
yep.
was some concern about the sales tax. The sales tax was the lion's share of what the program, was going to bring in terms of the funding.
Right.
There's just the state enabling legislation that I mentioned says to Nashville, you can't invent new mechanisms by which to tax people to do this. You can only select from what's already legal and on the books. And so of those available to us, we did hotel motel, which, by the way, I think is on the table for the Titan Stadium. That's something that transit advocates need to be asking about on those discussions. If we max out on that, it might no longer be available for WeGo. And then there was a business tax, rental car tax, but the bulk of it was the sales tax, and it is a regressive tax. However, there were things built into the program to where if you were very low income, if you qualified for, public benefits, for example, you could also get a pass to ride the transit system for free. So even if you were maybe paying more, and the sales tax, if you really can't afford it, you're going to be able to get on that bus for free. That was in the
Right.
program. I think it was undercommunicated.
Okay.
And then I think concerns around, if we have a rail line, or a BRT line going up through North Nashville, it's just going to exacerbate gentrification.
Right.
And I disagree with that very cynical assumption about something that's well off into the future, that working with leadership and the community, there's plenty of opportunity to
Right.
mitigate those concerns as things are getting built. But things are already gentrifying anyway.
Right.
It's gentrifying right now. So
Right.
why not offer the people who are still living there access to infrastructure
Right.
that they've been saying has been missing from those communities for generations,
Right.
and then put measures in place to the extent that we can to preserve the affordability of the real estate around those transit corridors as they get built, which there was a lot of recommendations that came out through the Transit and Affordability Task Force that Mayor Berry convened about tools that we could do as those rail corridors or BRT corridors were getting built to sort of preserve what was there and give people an opportunity to still live there and get on the bus or get
Right.
on the train as it gets built. So
Preservation. You bring up preservation. What does that look like at this point for Nashville? Because I think as growth is also a topic, and I think people know growth is happening, is going to happen, it's already happening. Preservation means something too, of being able to still keep a soul of a city, still keep its home feeling and its just Nashville just buzz and feeling where it's not a New York, it's not a Chicago, it's not a California, right? I don't think the people that have been here generations want it to be that, right? But with the growth is happening, we get probably just as much foot traffic as the Madison Square,
Right.
that's happening in New York that we do on Broadway, right? As far as compared to population and ratio. So what does that look like even in the sustainability world, right? Preservation for Nashville to keep that soul and like not turn into a New York of the South or a California of the South.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Or is it too late?
I mean, land values are really high here
Right.
right now. So, like where I live, kind of in the Westmead Highlands area, you know, the older housing stock from like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, really 60s, 70s, is getting torn down. And because the land values are so high, like a 9,000 square foot mansion is going up in its place, because that's what the developer needs
Right.
to turn a profit when the land costs, the dirt underneath costs that much money.
Right.
And so who can afford to get in that square footage of a house?
Yeah.
Like not middle class.
Right. Upper class.
Yeah. Very
Yeah.
very
Right.
upper class, more affluent people are going into those homes. So, I mean, when the land values are that high, I think we are going to have to keep returning to density as a solution because number one, we're just short on housing stock, period. Like there's just not a whole lot out there.
No.
And density enables you to get more
Right.
on the market. We've done a great job because of our tourism industry building a ton of hotels
Right.
in recent years. Like if you look at all these cranes that are up right now,
It's a lot of
I
them.
bet a good number of them are hotel.
Yeah.
And so there's a market for that because our tourism industry is booming. But, housing, I think not having transit in place is going to continue to hold us back because every time you look at doing a dense development, particularly near the urban core, if the transit just isn't there and it's not robust, it's not fixed guideway, it's not like it is in major cities, all of those like lending agencies and the people that are doing this for money are going to look at parking. And a parking spot in like downtown, midtown can run in terms of the construction cost as well as the land value around $18,000 to $20,000 per spot.
Wow.
So if we had transit in place, not only would we be able to get more housing built and, add to the quantity of what people are able to like select from in the market, but you could defer that $18,000 to $20,000 per parking space onto your subsidy or just whatever the developer needs to charge to make the rent or the mortgage more attainable for somebody based on what they're making.
Right.
So, that's a major thing that's happening right now is that banks that are lending developers are requiring them to add all this parking. And when you're doing it in a dense environment, you have to do structured parking, and that's very expensive.
Do you think that the lack of public transportation could also turn into a downfall and people could start leaving at some point?
Yeah, I think if you were to talk to people leaving Atlanta, that's probably
The number one
Yeah, that
reason.
might be, they're just tired of fighting the traffic congestion,
Right.
the air quality concerns.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people are working from home now, so maybe having a flex arrangement with their employer where they're doing a 3-2 or a 2-3.
hybrid, yeah.
Yeah, it's not as much of a concern, but that could change. I mean, Los Angeles, a lot of people love living in LA, and you simply just have to plan an hour
Right.
to get from point A to point B if you're an Angelino.
Who wants to do that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that's, again, it kind of goes back to a value statement.
Yeah.
Like, what does Nashville want to be, and are we willing to pay for it?
Yeah.
I've got now in my area, there's an active sort of like not in my backyard campaign for a suburban development and what is currently cherished rural countryside, sort of on the side of town that I live in. And it's
Yeah.
like, how many of those same people that are against this development coming to their neighborhood also voted against transit.
Right.
Did they connect the dots that voting down funding fixed guideway transit to where we could focus development on the corridors that can handle it? Like downtown can handle new people and all day long because
Right.
they've got the infrastructure, they've got the electricity poles, they've got the wastewater and
Right.
sewer, they've got WeGo service,
Right.
and that just needs to expand out to our major pikes that were built on an old streetcar system
Right.
when Nashville was first built.
Right.
They're we'll be talking about this if we don't get it built to a generation from now, because the streets aren't going to change. It's just a matter of how do we move more people through the existing right of way.
Go play that episode from 2022.
Right.
From 30 years ago.
Right.
Mary Beth said the exact same thing. Wouldn't that be wild?
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully we ain't at that point.
But I believe in Nashville. I believe that, especially like if we could somehow engage a lot of the new people that are coming here who come from transit-rich cities.
Right.
Even if the transit-rich city is like Orlando,
Right.
they've had an experience to where they understand the value and they see what's missing.
It breaks my heart to say this, but I think because Nashville is a major city, or getting to that point where it's a real major city now. But the people that grew up here, right, we're still like town folk mindset, like right, like, and I think the new people that are coming from these major cities is going to help us push forward. Because if it was up to maybe just us, maybe that doesn't happen.
Right.
Because we don't even know what that looks like. We never experienced. We just know what we know.
Right.
Right. And you have these other folks coming from these other cities, like, oh, this could work here, and it could be a better living experience for everyone. If you don't like the current traffic situation that is happening every single day.
Right. You'd asked me about preservation, and I kind of want to go back to that because I had another thought. But in terms of what we should be asking our mayoral candidates about next year, what asks are we putting on the table to the development community in terms of, Metro doesn't have a whole lot of money to like build stuff.
Right.
It's not Metro that's building the city right now.
Right.
It's the private sector that's, putting in the sidewalks and the street trees with their projects as they go in, or taking down trees or preserving them as they go in, or, doing the grading that could result in really severe stormwater impacts, as the climate changes. And, what are we getting out of the development community? Like, what's on the table in terms of like what we're asking them for,
Right.
as they're putting their capital forward to build their projects, and have we codified any of that in terms of policy? Because I think, just having a vision and a focus, because, you could say we want developers to do any number of things. We want them to have living wages. We want them to preserve open space for public park access. We want them to do a certain number of affordable housing units. We want them to, add X number of, or preserve X number of trees, sidewalks, bury the power lines, whatever it is, and probably a lot of that's happening on a case by case basis. And it depends on how active and engaged your council member is in the development review process with working with planning. But do we have sort of a list of priorities that we're engaging the private sector on, to where we're maximizing the opportunities as they're building the city for us?
Right.
To where, until we do better in terms of getting more resources out of the public sector, and the public sector do more, what are we asking on the private sector, and is there accountability there?
Mary Beth, this has been a master class, I think, for most of us. That's like, because you like being able to, I think, clearly explain and kind of plainly explain how transit, housing, equity, sustainability, preservation is kind of all connected, right? And how one could alleviate the other if done right. And it's not got to be a competition. It's like, if we can get this, great. Then we can tackle the other thing. And if we can do one and two at the same time, that's perfect too. But it's not a competition. Like, we need it all, right?
Right.
As Nashvillians, we need it all in where we're going. And so I kind of just want to close. I always give all my guests the close.
Yeah.
And so I want you to close with just, if it's something else that you want to extrapolate on, something that we didn't hit on, or if it's a question that I should have asked that I didn't ask, and you can answer it.
Yeah.
But I want us to I want to give you that time and space, because again, I think this conversation was so crucial and pivotal as someone that has experienced our last three mayors, those administrations, and kind of just seeing, even from a policy and just expertise level of like, okay, this is what's going to happen if this doesn't happen, and what do those measures look like, and how people can engage or should be engaging, or questions they should be asking, or things they should be demanding, so we can have a better, livable, equitable, and just city as we want to enjoy this growth. We don't want to be a heartache.
Right.
Like, we're growing, but sheesh, hey, I got to wake up 2 hours before I even have to wake up to go to work just to make it to work on time.
Right.
Type of thing. So I want to give you that space and that time.
Yeah. Well, so recently there's been yet another public engagement effort going on in terms of mobility downtown. I think it's called Connect Downtown. It's the planning process. We've had a downtown transportation plan done before when Convention Center got built. And so I think Nashville, a lot of people would agree that we're really great at doing like plan studies and task forces and committee recommendations and just a lot of generating ideas that don't actually, not a whole lot of it gets implemented,
right.
And then people forget about it, and then we have to go through a whole nother planning exercise. I like to think that maybe the planning fatigue is, next level at this point,
right.
And just, the answer to that question is what do you want to see happen in terms of mobility downtown?
Right.
The answer should be anything,
right?
Something. So if, for example, we have a hub and spoke transit system. I know for a fact that because of the over tourism down in Lower Broad, that MTA's buses leaving WeGo Central are getting hung up at 4 and 5 light cycles, on their southbound corridors, or even their if you want to go to the airport. If you want to experience this, just get on any southbound bus
right.
from WeGo Central around rush hour and sit through 4 and 5 light cycles at 5th and Broad or wherever it is, and you'll understand how on-time performance is being affected system-wide because of the activity downtown. Right. And so that is a real equity concern. Why should MTA's buses, if they want to add frequency, have to be bunching up or delayed because we can't seem to figure out a way for them to get through downtown in a way that's seamless for that entire hub and spoke system, which hub and spoke is not going away anytime soon. And so, I'd like to see somebody just blow it up and do a tactical urbanism, install of some bus lanes. And say, we're going to take advantage of whatever special event is going on in downtown right now to we're going to announce it. We're going to pilot this bus lane. And if it bombs, we've announced it as a experiment, and we're going to see how WeGo does as a result, as they go through their routes through the rest of the county as a result of giving them some space to move in and through downtown.
Don't know if we don't try.
Right, exactly. Another area of opportunity might be, Seattle apparently added a ton of jobs in their downtown over, 20, 25-year period of time without adding the commensurate number of cars. I think Councilmember Sharon Hurt did a voluntary piece of legislation where she was asking, any major employer going into a very dense building downtown to just go and meet with WeGo about, joining the Easy Ride program for their employees. And that, I think they do that, but it's more like checking a box. But can we be firmer with our major employers downtown about getting their employees to join the Easy Ride program, where they're subsidizing bus passes to the extent that they're subsidizing, $18,000 to $20,000 per parking spaces, and put a little bit of money, put a little skin in the game, and helping our transit system. It's not all in the public sector, you
Right.
know. And then, I think on our climate goals, it kind of goes hand in hand with the transit conversation, in that if we want to be a world-class, attractive to young people and creative professionals, 21st century city, sustainability, needs to be more, I think, on par with a lot of our other priorities.
Right.
And, that the only real way to cut into carbon pollution, is either to invest massive amounts of money in infrastructure like light rail or transit, or anaerobic digesters for composting, or whatever it is, and then regulation on the private sector. And that's very difficult to do politically, particularly when you have an activist state legislature that wants to potentially preempt whatever Nashville wants to do on that front, especially if it's for the environment.
Right.
Even though there's huge public health and equity benefits to anything you do to make, the environment cleaner.
Right.
It's just starting to do more to cut into the sources of pollution in our community, and that's our buildings, the utility sector, so
Right.
TVA and NES, our waste diversion, like
Right.
from what I understand, the landfills in Murfreesboro, where all of our regular trash goes, and then the construction and demolition landfill in Bordeaux are totally at capacity. So what's the plan for
Right.
dealing with the landfills closing?
It's like, you see, these things is like everyday people. I don't think we're thinking about these things.
Yeah.
Like we think about them when they affect us.
Right.
Right. We don't think about like how can we get in front of it so they won't affect us.
Well, when your trash and recycling gets more expensive because we have to ship it to Kentucky,
Then you'll know.
you'll know why. And that's, again, a symptom of our growth. Like, there's just too many people
Right.
throwing away too much stuff as just the byproduct of living their lives,
Right.
that it's causing the landfills to fill up. And then we also have, like, an issue around like I said, the land values being so high that, are we doing enough to preserve what we want to preserve, to have a really good park system,
Right.
In the year 2030 or 2040, where
Right.
even when you're in the densest neighborhood in New York City, you can walk along and there's a community garden or a pocket park that makes you feel like there's a little patch of green
Right.
in the midst of all the gray.
Right.
And that's an area of concern as well.
Right. Yeah, hopefully
So-
we'll not turn into a concrete jungle.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, we that's what I guess, even just being in the South, having this land and having like the greenery and like that's part of like living here and being here, being able to explore and have that and not be on top of one another if we don't have to. So hopefully we can do something. But like, this has been powerful. Definitely got to have you back, because I just like having these type of conversations. I know I don't even like have them often enough as I should be, because I think just even my proximity to like understanding like what is happening, like before it happens in impact community, which I think, being more proactive than reactive, right? And I think that's what you like really taught us, that we like, it's for transit, it's a little too late. Like, we're being like kind of reactive for that. But it's like a lot of other things that if we don't get transit, it's going to affect air pollution and sustainability and all of those things, where we need to get ahead of before more people continue to come and it starts affecting those things even more.
Right.
Like, even from I didn't even think about I didn't even think about that. Like, my trash bill could be another major expense if we don't figure out something with what we're doing with this growth.
Right.
And how can we lessen how much trash we throw away, or is it a recycling thing? Whatever we figure out, that's been kind of eye opening. And I hope and believe the people who are watching and listening to this, like, you've been able to take away like something from like planning and sustainability and like 2023 is going to be a very crucial year of what happens or what doesn't happen in Nashville, depending on who we elect or don't elect.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you being able to lay that out like greatly in a very like articulate, sophisticated, but clear and plain way. It like anybody, if you just was listening to this in your car and know nothing about transit, if you just moved to Nashville 5 days ago, like you now understand where we've been and what we tried to do, what didn't happen, and like where we need to be going now.
Well, I hope so, and I hope that Nashvillians and Americans in general can learn to just think a little bit less like short termers,
Yeah.
and a little bit more toward the long game, because a lot of these questions and challenges are like the year is 2022. If it hasn't been accomplished by now, it's because it's a really tough and complex challenge to solve. And so that a lot of times that requires a long game, a long-term strategy, and that requires all of us
Right.
to think less about ourselves
Right.
and more about the broader community and more beyond just the next 4-year election cycle.
And what I've realized talking to folks like yourself and just being in community organizing and things like that are decisions, things that we are seeing being done today. Those decisions were being put together 10, 15 years ago. You know, so it's like things are happening now. People are having discussions in silos somewhere.
Yeah,
Making
right.
these big decisions, right? That's why I think like being involved in like knowing what's happening at the council and on these like metro like these planning committees and all of these things where all of these things are being decided by like people from the community. Right.
Right.
A lot of these, you know, you don't have to be like someone that like special and like just be a resident. Right.
Right.
And you can sit on many of these commissions and these committees and things.
Right.
And be a part of like what's happening and not what's happening and what's happening or what won't happen. And also be able to inform others like, hey,
Right.
like we're voting on this, like come to this meeting, or, you know, did you know this was happening? Because
Right.
when it happens, it's too late.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we heard a lot during the transit referendum of people who voted against it because knowing that it would take 10 to 15 years to get from you know funding a light rail project to a ribbon cutting.
Right.
A lot of folks said, well, I might not even be in Nashville, or I might be dead, or and so I remember on Mayor Cooper's first day in office, he had a sit-in staged in his lobby by the Sunrise Movement of climate activists, because young people understand that they're about to inherit the lack of action on reducing carbon pollution that the former generations have saddled them with. And so, I would just invite people to, if you are going to be a Nashvilleian, even if you just moved here, think about what you want the community to be beyond the next 4-year election cycle, and organize yourselves.
Right.
And
how can people organize themselves around transit specifically? Where can people kind of get organized, and where can people get organized and build community around transit and be informed and, take direct action in some type of way, form, or fashion as well?
Well, the two main transit advocacy nonprofits in Nashville are called Transit Now Nashville, and the Transit Alliance of Middle Tennessee. The Transit Alliance of Middle Tennessee was formed really to sort of morph into a PAC when it was time to go for referendum, so where they could do some political spending on ads and things like that to get a winning campaign. Transit Now Nashville is, I would say, less focused than that and more informal. But I think both of those organizations probably need a nod from leadership, whether it be from the business community or elected officials, that there's hope for us going back out to referendum, and that it's coming and when, so that, we need to know that we need to get serious about gearing up, and what does that look like, and how do we reach people to convince them that this is the right thing to do in terms of taxing ourselves to generate the revenues that we need for a shared community benefit and infrastructure, which is expensive. But even just getting involved in your neighborhood association, like if you have specific things that you would like WeGo to do on existing bus service, you know, if WeGo knows that, you know, a ridership cohort might be there because neighbors from a given area of town have organized themselves and saying we would like this type of service here, you know, government is well positioned to respond to those demands if people are involved and know what they want, and everybody's on the same page. So,
well, people get organized.
Yeah.
Because we need we like transit. We need it. Yeah, I just, you know, and we may not know what that looks like right now, but we just know we need something different, something that works.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of forums as the mayoral campaigns kick into gear in 2023, and those will be widely accessible to where you and your neighbors or your your fellow transit advocates can turn out and
put them on a hot seat.
Yeah, tell the candidate like what's your plan for the next 4-year term on getting WeGo additional resources, and where are you on a referendum? Like what's your belief in terms of our communities need to go back out for a second shot at it? Because I'll give you an example. In Atlanta, you know, I think they went out their first time on a major regional referendum for MARTA as well as some other transportation improvements, and it failed. And then over the next 5 years, due to the growth, they got more racially and socioeconomically diverse. And when they went back out, that sort of electorate, being more supportive and understanding of transit, voted for it. So it is done in other cities. It can be done. We need not despair. And we need to build on all that work that we did to educate the public in 2018 about why this is needed, remind them, you know, and then make another ask, take another stab at it.
I think know what you should. I'm gonna give you some work that I think community, because I think a lot of times community members may not know the questions to ask, like bluntly, like directly, for a mayor to understand, or a mayoral candidate to really to not like get around it, right? And so. It'd be great if you put something together. Like these are direct, specific questions to ask your mayoral candidate around transit, like what he or she will do about this, or how they will address this. And you can even say, hey, this is the responses you're looking for. And these are the responses that like maybe they may not be for what you're for. But I just think as an educational tool, but something that allows community to go in prepared, or be able to organize around these specific questions. Like, hey, I'm going to ask this one, you ask this one, you ask that one. Because I think like that type of questioning puts the mayoral candidates on notice. Like, oh, community is like really asking me, and they're going to ask me every time when I'm at a different forum. And my answer better stay the same, or if it does change, it better change for the better because they have been enlightened by something. But I think that'll be great. Or you can just come on here and we can just talk about it even more, and people can just tune in. You know, either one is fine with me. But I think this is just crucial, and I really want people to be as informed and as equipped as possible to be as readily just to have the expectations not like conflicted or like confused, and be like, hey, I know exactly what this mayor says he or she will or won't do because I was armed with the right questions to ask. Right. You know, so.
Well, one of the reasons why dedicated funding for WeGo is important is because to do those big transformational transit capital projects like a BRT or a rail corridor, it gives the transit authority the ability to bond against that revenue, right? So they're not just like paying cash, right?
Right.
They're also borrowing through municipal bonds or whatever bonds against that revenue to build the thing. And so
Right.
the question would be, do you acknowledge that lack of dedicated funding for WeGo is holding us back as a city? And if so, do you, as an elected leader of our community, plan to exercise our option under the Approve Act to hold another referendum to raise taxes and send those to WeGo? Period.
There you go. Y'all have got the answers to the test. That's all we giving you right now.
Right.
But that is amazing. So what you need to do is hit rewind and write that question down. Or if you want to record this question and just play it, like, hey, this is my question.
Right.
That was amazing, man. But I appreciate it. We're gonna keep talking if we don't
That's
stop.
all
at this
right.
point.
Yeah.
We don't
Thanks,
stop.
Jerome.
No,
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did.
Yeah.
I really want to do this again, especially going into next year as more information come out about what mayoral candidates are willing to do or not willing to do, and kind of break that down with you, and like what that means and why that's maybe good or an issue as voters think about who they're going to vote for.
Absolutely.
That sounds good to you?
Yeah.
I got your commitment?
Yes, absolutely. I'd be glad to come back, and you're a great interviewer.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you. I try my best. You
Yeah.
do something enough, you get, I guess kind of good at it.
Yeah.
But no,
And I'm glad you care about our city, and I'm glad you're a proponent of public transportation and sustainability.
And I rode the MTA,
Yeah.
to Pearl High School. I was down when it was called the Shelter.
Yeah,
So I seen some wild things.
Yeah.
If you on the journey, just ride the MTA bus and you'll see the city. You'll get the feel of a mixture of all different type of people, in places, and it's just alternatives to know, like, if you don't have a car, like, this is an option.
Yeah, and that's a good reminder to close on too. It's like being on a bus with people from all different walks of life throughout the city is a form of shared public space, like our public schools and our, public plazas and parks and libraries and community centers. And we need more of that so that we can interact with each other and feel like we're part of a community.
It'd be great networking possibilities. You never know who you're sitting on the bus to, You
That's
never
right.
know.
Exactly.
Mary Beth, thank you again. I appreciate your time and availability and your knowledge that you poured into this conversation. And I can't wait to do it again.
Thanks, Jerome. I'll be back.
All right, for sure.
Okay.